picking up where we left off. So the boat has landed, and now the Noah and his family, they're leaving the boat, and they need to repopulate the world. The animals, they've left the boat, they're going to repopulate the world. They're going to fill the world with lots of animals. The trees and plants are regrowing. But in a lot of ways, the world is now in a worse state than it was beforehand. Now the consumption of meat will be required, as the nutritional elements of plants is probably reduced. And same with lifespan. People will no longer live to 1,000 years. The consumption of animals is almost required for survival. So we got that. This is the new normal. The normal that we ourselves are a part of. Now, there is a party that goes on, and Noah got really drunk, and one of his sons exposed his nakedness and did something shameful, and his two other sons covered him up with a blanket, and Noah cursed one son to be the slave of the other one. Now, that is the curse of Noah, is a curse that Noah proclaimed, whereas before this, God gave blessings to Noah and his family to bless them and the be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So that's kind of where we are now. And then we got into a genealogy that kind of explained the lines of Noah. But before that, we got another chapter, and this chapter kind of ties in a little bit after the flood. And this is the Tower of Babel story, which I always thought was kind of interesting. Genesis 11:1, and the whole earth was of one language and one account and one mode of expression. And I mean, that makes sense, right? You got a family on a boat, and they were all speaking to each other before they went on the boat. Well, presumably, maybe there was someone getting the silent treatment. But they got on the boat, and then they were there for a pretty long period of time, and then they got off the boat. So they would all be speaking the same language. No one came up with a different dialect. Even though they were on the boat, I mean, they weren't speaking like sailors in a different language. So we got that. And then they find this nice place, and they're going to settle there. Genesis 11:2. And they journeyed eastward, and they found the plain, a valley, in the land of Shinar. And they settled and dwelt there. So they find this nice, lovely place, and they're going to create a city. Genesis 11:3. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks, and burn them thoroughly," so that they had bricks of stone and slime, bitumen for mortar. So when it comes to the settlement of locations, it's one thing to create temporary housing. You throw together some tents, or you make some hovels and get some thatched roofs, but that's not what they're doing here. They're making bricks, right? So they're taking clay out of the ground, they're heating it up, drying it out, making bricks, making mortar. So they're gonna slap the bricks together. They're making brick houses, making some serious homes, and serious and permanent, right? So we got some permanent homes being made. And from the sounds of it, I mean, they could all be there. Maybe they were. This was just like a grouping that was a lot of them, and maybe some of them were obedient to God and they went out to somewhere else distant. But it's hard to say exactly how this went down. But for the most part, the majority of civilization is right here in this centralized spot. Genesis 11:4, and they said, "Come, let us build a city, a tower whose top reaches the sky, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over the whole earth." There's not very many of them, so if they all spread out, there wouldn't be a very high population density. And we got this other aspect here in this sentence where it talks about reaching the sky. This is the Mazzaroth. This is the zodiac. This is the searching for signs in the sky. This is when people put their trust in their horoscope, or trust in something that isn't God, and use it as a central pillar in their life, signing the rights of control, their agency, over to another entity. Whether or not that entity is real or not, or an idea, philosophical value, or a deity, or a whatever, it doesn't matter, right? That's what this is. They're making an idol out of the sky and trusting in that rather than God. So they're making this massive tower, the Tower of Babel, as they say. And that's not really a good thing. Genesis 11:5, and the Lord came down to see the city which the sons of man had built. So this is the sons of man. This wasn't like some interference thing. This wasn't the angels coming here. Oh, well, let's go, could convince them to make a tower or something, right? This was just men on their own, left to their own devices, just building this tower, for a way to worship the sky, right? And the Lord comes down, presumably in the flesh, came down to see it, and he's going, what is this? And here we go, Genesis 11:6. And the Lord said, behold, there are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And now, nothing they have imagined they can do will be impossible for them. So this is kind of, God kind of saying what's going on here, right? Everybody's all of one language. We kind of got that figured out, right? That everybody's all working together, all unified by one language bringing them together, that they can communicate directly. And in many ways, that's where we are heading as a society now, is with the internet and Google Translate or whatever, that we can all kind of communicate with each other. But this would have been a more pure form in the sense that they didn't need to have the translation layers, although they did have the internet, so they didn't have the size and scope, but there wasn't as many people. So left side, right? And this is the beginning, right? The creativity of man and just the ability to step in every pothole that there is on the way home and getting your feet nice and wet. So this is what it is. This is just the man's propensity for getting into trouble, falling astray, not being obedient, man doing his own thing, right? It's like, oh, we'll spread forth multiply. No, we'll build a giant tower, right? And we'll worship that, right? So it's not really that good. And this probably wasn't very long after they got off the boat, right? It doesn't take long. People, like man, can fall incredibly quickly. It doesn't take much. And then this is the other aspect here, is that they're making something and they're seeing what they're making and that it's inspiring, right? When you see a car, it's like, well, we can make that, we can make a better one, we can do this, whatever, right? That it is like that progressive sense of the human condition, in that when given tools, we refine them over generations with different people all working together, that greatness can come from people working together, and that anything can be overcome with it. And you look at our modern society and the technology and the artificial intelligence and all that fun stuff, that all started really small and kept growing as people worked together over many generations to build up to that point. And in many cases, it's my belief that the loss of information was the great barrier. And then with our modern technology, the ability to prevent the loss of data is what allowed things to advance more quickly, because less information was lost. Because the same thing didn't have to be invented 6 times, when you could just look at a document from another country of how to do something, and then you could build on top of that. And everybody kind of united together, and that is the modern society. I digress. Genesis 11:7. Come, let us go down there. Confound, mix up, confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Now this is crazy. This is the Tower of Babel, and when we hear the word Babel, that usually means like, oh, he's speaking Babel, right? I guess we don't normally say Babel, we say Babel. But that's where the word comes from, right? Nonsense, speaking nonsense. It's to confuse the languages. So people are no longer going to be able to understand each other, and this is how God's going to break this tower building up and get people to actually spread forth and multiply. Fill the earth. The earth is meant to be filled with life. It's a place of the living. It's not a place of the dead. Genesis 11:8. So the Lord scattered them abroad from that place upon the face of the whole earth, and they gave up on building the city. Well, it's probably pretty hard to build the city if you can't understand what the guy beside you is saying. There have been numerous instances over the years of miscommunications leading to tremendously awful outcomes. think there was a plane that crashed recently within the last 100 years where they filled it up the amount of liters when they were supposed to be filling it up by gallons. So it had essentially a quarter of the amount of fuel that it needed and ran out of gas and didn't end very well. There was another one where they were building the warship, and I think it's the Vasa warship, and there was like the Swedish foot and then the Amsterdam foot, and the one's 12 inches, the other's 11 inches. So the one, it was built lopsided and just kind of went down into the water and killed everybody on board, basically. So stuff like that can happen. Now imagine if you're trying to build a tower to the sky, a tower to the heavens, right? Like, be very hard to do at the best of times, let alone not being able to communicate with each other. I mean, if it was a smaller scale thing, like, in many cases in the area I'm in, it's like you could have a bunch of people working on your roof, and they might not necessarily be able to communicate to each other to any great degree, but even a limited degree is enough to get the job done. Sometimes only an entry-level form of communication is required, and other times you really need to be on the same page or nothing's going to happen. So that's just kind of what's going on here. And the other thing that you got to remember is that they would have no coping mechanisms for a lack of communication, right? They didn't have any fallbacks or commonalities, right? This isn't the same as some Italians, hanging out with some Portuguese boys looking to have a good time, right? This could have been very, like, those languages are somewhat similar. This could have been something far more drastic, right? You take some Native American, I don't know if that's what we're allowed to call it now, but the people indigenously here before Christopher Columbus's whatever, and the French, right? Like, it's the language difference would be a lot larger than groups that are from local areas or some portions of Africa and the middle of Russia, right? Like, these would have been drastic changes in language, not just a simple dialect or a just like an accent, right? So the damage was obviously tremendous, and they gave up on making their tower to the sky elevator. Genesis 11:10. This is the history of the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old when he became the father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. So looks like we're back into another set of genealogies here. So that's the end of the Tower of Babel story. That's why they included this here. Whatever. It is what it is. Genesis 11:11. And Shem lived after Apishadad was born 500 years and had other sons and daughters. 11:12. When Apishadad was 35 years old, he became the father of Shelah. Genesis 11:13. Apishadad lived after Shelah was born 403 years and had other sons and daughters. 11:14. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he became the father of Eber. Genesis 11:15. Shelah lived after Eber was born 403 years and had other sons and daughters. Genesis 11:16. When Eber had lived 34 years, he became the father of Peleg. 11:17. And Eber lived after Peleg was born 430 years and had other sons and daughters. 18. When Peleg lived 30 years, he became the father of Reu. 19. And Peleg lived after Reu was born 209 years and had other sons and daughters. 20. When Reu had lived 32 years, he became the father of Serug. And 21. And Reu lived after Serug was born 207 years and had other sons and daughters. 22. When Serleg had lived 30 years, he became the father of Nahor. 23. And Serleg lived after Nahor was born 200 years and had other sons and daughters. 1124. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he became the father of Terah. And 25. And Nahor lived after Terah was born 119 years and had other sons and daughters. You can really see the amount of years of life is just dropping fast. 1126, after Terah had lived 70 years, became the father of Abram and Nahor and Haran. Those are some, well, there's one name in there in particular that's very important to the rest of this, as we'll see, and that's a lot of the reason why these genealogies are important for tracking back the family lines. 1127. Now this is the history of the descendants of Terah. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran was the father of Lot. 1128. Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his birth in Ur of the Chaldees. 1129. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Michlan and Ishka. 1130. But Sarai was barren and she had no child. Back in those days, and not even those days, in recent history, not too long ago, maybe I'm gonna sound old, but not having kids was, kind of a big deal, right? You had to have kids to continue on the family line, to go to the next generation, and not being able to have kids was a terrible thing. It was very awful, and in many cases, the women were blamed for it. In a lot of cases, it wasn't their fault, and who knows? There's a lot of complicated circumstances in that. Although I have heard recently, due to the advancing of age in relation to first marriages and stuff, that a lot of couples now, because they're getting together so much later in age, that they're like completely infertile. So nobody can, a lot of couples can't even have kids if they want them, even though in most cases they don't want kids, right? We are in the generation of the self, and the self trumps all. It's what can they do for me, and it's not anything about building a family or doing anything of the conventional variety. And I think in a lot of cases people are very miserable as a result. So Sarai was probably pretty upset and disappointed that she didn't have any kids and wasn't able to have them. And this is kind of setting up something for a little bit later. But let's finish this chapter. 1131. And Terah took Abram his son, Lot the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together to go to Ur the Chaldees, into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. So they didn't make it all the way to Canaan. And typically, the name Canaan's going to come up a lot. It's kind of like the promised land. So it's always like this journey of getting to Canaan, getting to the promised land, getting to where it's going to be good. 1132. And Tahar. Oh my. Oh. Genesis 11:32. And Terai lived 205 years, and Terai died in Haran. So she never got to see Canaan, and died in Haran, where they kind of settled, right? So they wanted to go to Canaan. They didn't quite make it to Canaan. They settled in Haran. So that is the end of Genesis chapter 11. First half dealing with our fancy Tower of Babel, and our second half dealing with the line leading up to Abram. Oh man, Abram is a really cool character. You just wait a couple more pages and we'll be there. Oh man, exciting. Exciting. I should also mention too that earlier when I said that it was required for nutrition, there's an element to that, but the greater element is probably that man now needs things to die to live. It echoes what happened earlier in the garden when they first consumed the fruit, found out they were naked, and clothed themselves with leaves, and then God took the leaves away and clothed them in skins. That it's only with the death of other things are they able to perpetuate their existence. So, yeah, gotta throw that in there. Disclaimer alert. Cheers.